Hey guys, welcome back to the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles! Resolve. In the last episode, it was a very long episode, but I'm sorry for that. I promise I tried to keep it down, but I didn't feel like there was a real cut that we could actually make, but I'm gonna try to avoid that kind of stuff. So we talked to Professor Mikotoba and a lot of things happened. There was a telegram, and also we talked to Baroque von Zieks and learned a little bit more about the circumstances 10 years ago. And now we're here still at the hotel lobby, and we are supposed to go somewhere. And the question is, where are we supposed to go? I don't actually really know, because we were at the prison already. So what happens if we go to Fresno Street? 2nd November, room on Fresno Street. Okay, there's nobody here. Do we have still all the check marks? No, we don't. The photograph of Mrs. Vigil.
Realizing the identity of this lady was a very great clue to exposing Mr. Gossip's true identity. He obviously loves his wife very dearly, which is why he felt he couldn't tell her the truth.
The transformation was incredible, wasn't it? Just from that big twisted lip.
Yes, he went to extraordinary efforts to play the part of Hugh Boone convincingly.
Although it didn't really seem like it was much of an effort to me.
Now you say it, I have to agree.
It's almost as if that Mr. Vigil's true character.
People really are very hard to fathom at times.
Okay. What about the notice board? There are details of cases stretching back over 10 years on this notice board. Yes, a history of Lord von Zieks' defeats in court.
I don't think that's an appropriate description. Although, when you consider everything on the board, it's certainly true that all these people had a background of dubious dealings.
And in the end, of course, the board itself concealed the inspector's own death.
Oh my, it really doesn't bear thinking about.
Okay, what happens if we talk... Okay, we can't talk to the officer. Alright, everything here covered. Everything here covered. We could have a look at all these things. Since we're here, let's just do that. Using a candle as a timer device. Very ingenious, I must say.
Yes, the culprit arranged it so the firecracker would be set off at 5 o'clock and then left.
So that a loud bang was heard at precisely the moment Lord von Zieks arrived, yes. If only he hadn't picked up that gun from the floor.
Something you probably told yourself once upon a time, I imagine.
Yes, I've learned that lesson by bitter experience. I would have turned and run a mile for sure.
Which may not have done you any favors either.
Yeah, that's a reference to the first case, because we picked up the gun at the crime scene when Dr. John H. Wilson was shot, and that led us to be the defendant, to be the accused. Alright, what about the figurine? I'd never have imagined that this little figurine would turn out to be a winding key.
I suppose it's a policeman because the pocket watch was a gift from Scotland Yard. It seems there was much more to Inspector Gregson than we ever realized. He was clearly a brilliant man.
It's the fish and chips that throws off. I feel as though it ruined his image.
I really don't think we should blame on one of Britain's staple cuisines.
But think about it. Imagine if it was Mr. Schultz. How would you feel if instead of that old briar pipe that's always in his hand, Mr. Schultz had a bag of chips?
Rather disappointed, if I'm honest.
Exactly. Yeah, little things make a difference. People are swayed by that kind of things, unfortunately. This revolver, just who does it belong to?
Well, we know it's of the type issued to members of the police force and judiciary.
But Gregson's own gun was found on his person.
And of course, Lord von Zieks has admitted to losing the firearm with which he was issued. Such absent-mindedness, not dissimilar to you, Mr. Naruto.
I'm starting to think the cold, hard prosecutor and I could become friends after all.
Then I wish you every success.
Alright. If it turns out that Gregson didn't actually die in here at all, where on earth could he have been killed?
Well, one way or another, we must find out, for the inspector's sake. You know, you look awfully pale again today, Mr. Naruto.
Sorry, when I start thinking it all through, I conjure up some horrible images in my mind.
Your imagination is the culprit here then. Most certainly guilty.
Okay, what about the hairpiece? It catches your eye as soon as you enter the room, doesn't it?
It's such a bright color. It certainly makes an impression. Yes.
They can't possibly commit any crimes, can they? I mean, redheads stand out like a sore thumb.
I'm afraid with our jet black Japanese hair, we stand out almost as much here in London.
Huh, I suppose that's true.
You mustn't think of committing any crimes, Mr. Naruto.
I wasn't! Okay, we checked out everything, so let's keep moving then. Let's keep moving. So let's keep to Mr. Vigil's hospital bed then. Second November, St. Sinus Hospital, Ward 3.
This is the ward where Mr. Vigil was brought, apparently.
To be frank, I'm a little worried about seeing him again. Oh, the lawyer. Hello again.
Oh, are you feeling better now, Mr. Vigil?
Yes, thank you. Somewhat better. I'm so sorry to have caused you to... I mean, it was because of me. If I hadn't exposed your secret and forced you to remember things you'd obviously tried to forget. The prosecutor was here until a few moments ago too. You just missed him. Oh, Kazuma beat us to it. He said much the same as you. He was very apologetic. But the truth is, I brought all this upon myself.
Please, don't think like that.
Keeping it from Evie, my wife, all these years, I've carried such a sense of guilt. But that's not the worst of it. Over time, I obviously came to deceive myself as well.
You mean about your dismissal?
Looking back now, I'm beginning to think that perhaps Inspector Gregson didn't stumble across me by accident at all. I mean, he compensated me so generously for acting as his stand-in. He was clearly concerned for my well-being and doing what he could to help me. So perhaps Gregson knew exactly what he had become of Mr. Vigil all along then. I'm sure this is just his deserts for 10 years of lies and deception, but... It wasn't me that helped the professor escape 10 years ago. It wasn't me. I swear it. I swear it's true.
Oh, Mr. Vigil.
I'm sure you'd rather not dredge up even more from I'm sure you'd rather not dredge up even more from your past at this time, but if possible, could you tell us exactly what really happened? I want to. I need to get all of this off my chest. I just want someone to tell me what I should have done. Oh, Mr. Vigil. Okay, we examined here already. We were here already. And there's nothing to check out. That's very good already. Okay, very, very nice. But, you know me, we're gonna present things first. Mr. Vigil, would you mind casting your eyes over this? Oh, my head. It's throbbing.
Oh no! It's too soon, Mr. Naruto. It's too much for him.
It's too much for me seeing him swoon like that. Maybe I should lay off the evidence for a while. Okay, that is a clear indication that we shouldn't do things like that. Even the dismissal notice? Yeah, it's the same thing. Okay, so we're not supposed to present anything to him. Okay, I get it. Sorry guys. We're just gonna converse then. Gregson's request. Inspector Gregson was obviously engaged in a special operation of some sort. He was investigating something that even Scotland Yard couldn't know about. Details of the Reaper's marks, yes. It was when he had to carry out those investigations that I would take his identification and impersonate him. You'd pretend to be the inspector and carry out investigations on his behalf?
Oh no, never! A common street peddler couldn't possibly carry out a proper police investigation.
All I would do is go to the specified location and make a little hoo-ha. Just something to leave an impression, so everyone there would think a detective called Gregson was here.
So, that's what you were doing on the day prior to the incident?
Yes, he asked me to make an appearance at the park on Lion Street for the Red-Headed League event. So as usual, I flashed the inspector's identification around and was very vocal about my presence.
But then you were taken prisoner by those red-headed fraudsters!
Yes. So you would always make a point of showing Gregson's identification, and generally being loud? That's what the inspector asked me to do, yes.
Well, that's one way of becoming a legendary detective, I suppose. Not a good one, though.
And as you know, I suffered this bruising around my neck at their hands. But the following day, they kept their word and released me. Without returning the inspector's identification to you, however. We had arranged to meet in the Fresno Street room at 5 that day so I could report back to the inspector. But at the agreed time, that's when I heard the gunshot. Just by the way, guys, I love the music of this guy. It's so secretive, kind of. It's just awesome. The music all around is so good in this game. It's a Capcom game, so it is kind of supposed to be a game with great music. So kudos to Capcom. Thanks for that. The prison escape.
It was at midnight on 11th of June, 10 years ago. That was the time scheduled for the execution.
But the professor's execution never actually took place, did it?
Or rather, the execution itself must have been used to effect the plan of escape. I hardly dare to imagine what a chilling plan it was.
Berkeley was renowned for being the highest security prison in the country. Everything that went in or out of the place was searched multiple times. But there was one notable exception. Or rather, one notable loophole. Something that was never questioned. I have a feeling I know what that loophole was now. The coffins into which the bodies of the executed convicts were placed, correct?
Yes.
Once the coroner had confirmed the death of a condemned victim, the body was taken in its coffin for immediate burial in the Lawgate Cemetery just behind the prison. The chief warder first had to sign the necessary papers. And after that, no member of staff was permitted to touch the coffin containing the body again. When executions took place, only the executioner and the coroner were permitted inside the chamber. I would wait in the adjacent room for word that the condemned convict was dead. On that occasion, once I had that confirmation, I went into the mortuary to find a lone coffin, as usual. The procedure was that I would sign the paperwork having checked the coffin, then nail it shut. But for some reason that day, the coffin was already nailed shut.
No!
I didn't think anything of it at the time. I assumed that my deputy must have checked the coffin and nailed it shut before I arrived. So, you mean the coffin contained... Yes, I can only imagine that Asogi, having escaped his execution somehow, was alive inside the coffin. The coffin was then taken out through the main gates and deposited in Lawgate Cemetery.
Presumably there wouldn't have been enough air inside to breathe for long.
So in the early hours following the burial, somebody dug up the coffin again to set Genshin free.
But in the end, he was fatally shot in the graveyard anyway. What on earth really happened in Lawgate Cemetery that night, I wonder?
I'm afraid I really don't know. All I can say with certainty are two things. Asogi couldn't possibly have escaped that way without help from somebody working in the prison. And that somebody was not me. Okay. Interesting. The convict Asogi. Obviously you knew the man then. The professor, I mean. Genshin Asogi. Yes, I remember him well, in fact. Would you mind telling us what you know? Well, having been condemned to death as he was, any contact I had with the man was short, obviously. After that trial, which was carried out behind closed doors, attended only by elite members of the judiciary, they called for his execution to be carried out at the earliest possible opportunity. The outcome of the trial was set from the beginning, wasn't it?
It was a time of delicate diplomacy when Britain and Japan were in the process of signing an important treaty. That meant that this potentially destabilizing case had to be dealt with swiftly and discreetly.
The man had less than a week in total. As I was the chief warder, I oversaw his short stay in the cells until his final hour. I remember being struck deeply by his noble character and incredible resilience. What do you mean exactly? He was a killer of many men, but he was always quiet and polite. He was a gentleman and a man of intellect. In fact, I couldn't bring myself to believe what he'd done, so I asked him one day. Those 5 members of the aristocracy whose lives were taken, were you really responsible? I'm guilty of the unforgivable crime of ending another human's life, yes. The following day, the closed trial took place. Just a second. He says, I'm guilty of the unforgivable crime of ending another human's life. Yes. That doesn't... And he says, of another human's life. So he killed only one person. Maybe it was the killer. And that killer might have been someone that is so important that he had to kill him. Okay, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. The following day, the closed trial took place, and the verdict was not surprise. Guilty. That night, when he was brought back to his cell, I saw something unusual. Something unusual? What? The last will and testament of Genshin Asogi. Asogi's will. As I said, it was on the night following his trial after he had been found guilty. I was doing the rounds of the cell, and when I looked into Asogi's, I noticed that he seemed to have a sheet of paper in his hand. Oh, his last will and testament then, presumably? As soon as he noticed me, he hurriedly shoved it behind his back.
But why did you find that so unusual? Isn't it normal for a man to pen a will when he knows his death is nigh?
Yes, that's true, but there were special conditions to Asogi's incarceration, you see. What sort of conditions? Well, even though he was held in a cell designed for condemned inmates, he was allowed to keep his personal effects with him, with one exception. Really? He was allowed his things? That is unusual, certainly. Of course, he'd been convicted of killing 5 members of the aristocracy. But at the same time, he was a guest in our country from the Empire of Japan. The powers that be were determined that his final days shouldn't be needlessly uncomfortable.
And what was the exception you mentioned? To the personal effects he was allowed?
That's the point. He wasn't permitted to have writing materials. Specifically, no pens or paper.
So, he was prevented from leaving any written record of what had happened to him?
Yes, that was the long and the short of it. I have no idea where he obtained that paper. Any writing materials would have been confiscated from him upon his incarceration. As I said, he hid the paper behind his back and then he pleaded with me. What did you just hide behind your back? Please turn a blind eye. This
is my lifeline. But you know it's against the rules. You're the only person who's seen if you just agree to keep quiet. Alright then, but what's on that paper? A last will and testament. This will is the only weapon I have left now. How can a will be a weapon? So I decided to pretend I'd seen nothing, and I let him keep his will. But then later, it just seemed to vanish without trace. What? What do you mean, it vanished? It would seem that isn't the end of the story of this mysterious will. The will's disappearance. I was the only person who saw Asogi's will, but somehow it disappeared. It was after Asogi's execution, which was actually an elaborate jailbreak. The warders gathered up and Asogi's possessions that were in his cell. They were all to be sent back to his family home in Japan, you see. To poor Kazuma-sama. And you're saying that it wasn't anywhere to be found among his personal effects? The will, I mean. That's right, though I didn't search through them myself. But Governor Caden was livid. He was screaming, "It can't have disappeared!" It can't have disappeared completely. That doesn't quite make sense though, does it? In what way? Well, we'd understood that only Mr. Vigil was aware of the will's existence. In which case, how did the prison governor know to look for it? Oh yes, you're right. I really don't know how he knew, but it certainly seemed as though he knew of the will's existence from the outset. Only he didn't refer to it as a will. What he said was the Asogi papers. The Asogi papers? I really can't tell you anything of the subsequent events. Because, well, of what happened. Your dismissal and the way you blocked it all from your memory. I'd forgotten all this until today. I don't suppose it's relevant to the case, though. Well, anyway, thank you very much for sharing it with us, Mr. Vigil. We're very Sorry, guys. We're very grateful. I'm afraid there's really little more I can tell you. My wife, Iwi, will be here shortly, so I do hope I don't appear rude, but... No, not at all. Thank you again. But why? But what will become of you now? Well, impersonating a police officer is a criminal offense, of course. Imagine that once I'm fully recovered, I shall be arrested. I'm so sorry. Don't be, please. This was all my own doing. I always knew that this day would come. Well, I wish you well. Goodbye, Mr. Vigil. Oh, what a sad... Oh! Before you go, there's just one thing. Yes, what is it? The Asogi papers. I'd be very grateful if you'd make no mention of the things I told you about them. Presumably for some good reason? It's my understanding that their very existence is a closely guarded secret. If it became known that I'd remembered, well, it could be rather troublesome, I think. I understand. Some sort of will that Keichin Asogi penned just before his death, which the man himself claimed was his last weapon? I wonder, perhaps it had something to do with his plan to escape. If there's anyone who might know more about a document that Kazuma's father left behind, it would be Mr. Vigil's governor. Then we know precisely where we must go. Back to Barclay Prison.
Oh man. What a sad story. Well, at least he seems to be on the mend.
You know, his disguise as Mr. Gossip was really quite masterful, wasn't it?
I can't remember anything about it except for the floppy lip.
I imagine not even his wife would have recognized him.
Perhaps, but did he really have to take it quite so far? Okay, things are getting really interesting now, guys. We are going to move. New location has been added, which is the prison, I guess. Oh, the prosecutor. Oh, we could also go to Cosmo if we wanted to. But I think we're gonna go to the prison first. Are we though? Are we going to the prison first? I guess we're gonna go to the prison first. But we're gonna do that on the although we can move there already if we want to. Oh no, this is the prison. We're not, I mean the prison governor's office. There we want to go because we want to pursue this matter further, don't we? Well, but we will have to do things here on the next occasion, which is the next episode of the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. Resolve. If you want to know how things unfold, you'll have to tune in next time. See you then.